The slap hit so hard that my earring flew across the room. For a second nobody moved. Not my husband. Not my mother-in-law. Not even my father-in-law, who stood there breathing heavily as if he'd done something righteous. Then he pointed at me and barked, "Are you letting your parents live in luxury with my son's money? My name is Callista Ravenshade. I'm 31 years old, and until that moment, I thought the worst thing my husband's family could do was judge me behind my back. I was wrong. A week earlier I had taken my parents on a short anniversary vacation. Nothing extravagant. A cozy lakeside resort 2 nights away, and a chance for them to relax after years of sacrifice. I paid for every cent myself. Every hotel booking. Every meal. Every ticket. But my father-in-law, Gerald Whitaker, had seen the photos online and created his own version of the story. One where I was stealing from his son. One where my parents were parasites. My husband, Nolan, kept saying, "Dad, please calm down." But Gerald wasn't listening. Then he revealed how he knew exactly how much money I had spent. And suddenly something felt very, very wrong. $5,382. The number rolled off Gerald's tongue without hesitation. My stomach tightened. That was the exact amount I had spent on the trip. Not an estimate. Not a guess. The exact amount. I slowly turned toward my husband. Nolan looked just as confused as I felt. "Dad, how would you even know that?" he asked. Gerald immediately looked away. For the first time since barging into our house, he seemed nervous. My mother-in-law, Diane, suddenly stepped between us. "That's not important," she snapped. "What's important is that Callista is wasting family resources on her parents." Family resources. The phrase almost made me laugh. I was the chief financial officer of a growing software company. My salary was nearly twice Nolan's. The vacation had come from my personal account. Everyone in the room knew it. Yet somehow I was being treated like a thief. Gerald folded his arms. "Married money is family money," he said coldly. "Your responsibility is your husband's family first." That sentence told me everything. But what happened later that night revealed something even worse. Someone had been secretly watching my finances. That night, after Gerald and Diane finally left, I sat at the kitchen table staring at my banking app. Nolan sat across from me, rubbing his forehead. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. Then I opened the account activity log. My heart dropped. There had been multiple login attempts from a device I didn't recognize. Not once. Not twice. Dozens of times over the past 6 months. "Callista," Nolan whispered. I showed him the screen. His face went pale. The access attempts weren't coming from another city. They were coming from the neighborhood where his parents lived. Suddenly dozens of strange moments started making sense. Gerald somehow knowing my bonus amount. Diane mentioning purchases I had never discussed. Their constant comments about my savings. They hadn't been guessing. They'd been collecting information. The next morning I changed every password I owned. Bank accounts. Investments. Everything. Less than 2 hours later my phone rang. Gerald's name appeared on the screen. The moment I answered, he was screaming. And what he shouted confirmed my worst suspicion. "Why did you lock us out?" Gerald's voice exploded through the phone before I could say hello. For a moment I simply stared at the screen. "Not me. Not your mother." The word told me everything. "Lock you out of what?" I asked calmly. Silence. A long, dangerous silence. Then Gerald realized what he'd admitted. "You know exactly what I'm talking about," he growled. "No," I replied. "Actually, I don't." He hung up. 10 minutes later, Diane began sending messages. First came guilt. Then accusations. Then outright threats. By evening, Nolan and I were sitting inside our bank manager's office. The investigation took less than an hour. Someone had linked recovery information to one of my older financial accounts years earlier. The contact number belonged to Diane. The recovery email traced back to a device registered under Gerald's name. I felt physically sick. For years they had quietly monitored parts of my finances. But the humiliation didn't end there. 3 days later, during a large family gathering, Gerald stood up in front of everyone and revealed what he thought was my biggest secret. More than 30 relatives filled the banquet hall that evening. Birthdays, anniversaries, graduations. My husband's family loved combining celebrations into one massive event. I had barely sat down when Gerald rose from his chair and tapped his glass. The room went quiet. A bad feeling settled in my chest. "Since we're all family," he announced, "I think everyone deserves to know where Callista's priorities really are." Several heads turned toward me. Nolan immediately stood up. "Dad, don't." Gerald ignored him. He pulled out a folder. My folder. Bank statements. Travel receipts. Investment summaries. Private information that should never have left my accounts. Whispers spread across the room. I felt dozens of eyes on me. "While my wife and I struggle," Gerald declared dramatically, "she spends thousands pampering her parents." The room erupted into murmurs. Then Gerald smiled. He expected me to cry. To defend myself. To break. Instead, I slowly stood up. For the first time all evening, I wasn't angry. I was calm. Because sitting in my purse was a document that would destroy everything Gerald had built his reputation on. And nobody in that room knew it yet. I walked to the front of the room without saying a word. Gerald looked pleased with himself. He thought he had already won. I took the microphone from his hand. Then I held up a thick stack of papers. "Since we're sharing private financial information tonight," I said, "let's share all of it." The room instantly fell silent. Gerald's smile disappeared. I opened the first document. "Over the last 4 years, I have personally paid for my in-laws' mortgage assistance, medical bills, car repairs, insurance premiums, and monthly living expenses." A stunned silence followed. Then I read the total. $87,000. Several relatives gasped. Diane's face lost all color. I wasn't finished. One by one, I displayed the transfers, receipts, and account records on the projector behind me. Every payment. Every date. Every amount. The evidence was undeniable. Gerald suddenly lunged toward the projector. "Turn that off." But the damage was done. Then I revealed one final document. And the entire room learned a secret Gerald had hidden from everyone for years. The final document wasn't mine. It belonged to Gerald. Specifically, it was a series of unpaid loan notices and overdue tax filings that he'd spent years hiding from the family. The room fell deathly silent as the first page appeared on the screen. Then the second. Then the third. Every document carried his name. Every balance was overdue. Every warning notice was real. Diane looked at her husband as if she were seeing a stranger. "What is this?" she whispered. Gerald didn't answer. Because he couldn't. The truth was finally standing in the middle of the room for everyone to see. For years he had portrayed himself as the wise patriarch who managed money better than everyone else. In reality, he was drowning in debt. Worse, several of the expenses he had accused me of making were smaller than the luxury purchases he had secretly charged to credit cards. The relatives who had been whispering about me minutes earlier were now staring at him. Some looked shocked. Others looked furious. Gerald suddenly turned toward me. His eyes were filled with panic. Then he said something I never expected to hear. "Please." The word barely escaped Gerald's mouth. The same man who had slapped me. The same man who had humiliated me in front of an entire room of relatives. The same man who had spent years judging me. Now he was begging. "Please don't do this," he whispered. But there was nothing left for me to do. The truth was already on the screen. The truth was already in everyone's hands. The room remained silent as Gerald slowly lowered himself to his knees. Several relatives gasped. Diane burst into tears. Nolan stood beside me, stunned. "Callista," Gerald said, his voice trembling, "I'm sorry. I was wrong. Please forgive me." A week earlier I would have given anything to hear those words. Now they meant nothing. Because this was never about a vacation. It was never about money. It was about control. Gerald couldn't accept that I was successful, independent, and capable of helping my own parents without asking anyone's permission. So he tried to shame me. When that failed, he tried to expose me. Instead, he exposed himself. I looked down at him and spoke calmly. "I forgive you, Gerald. But I will never finance your life again." That was the real consequence. Not humiliation. Not revenge. Accountability. Over the following months, every dollar of support stopped. For the first time in years, Gerald had to live with the results of his own decisions. And for the first time in years, I was finally free.